I'm Kira Vance, 34, and I've spent my life turning simple ingredients into masterpieces as a private caterer. It all started when I saw a ghost of a man rummaging through my recycling bin on a freezing Tuesday morning. The sun hadn't even breached the horizon yet. My kitchen was a sanctuary of warmth and the scent of rising sourdough. I was awake at 4:30 a.m., prepping for a high-stakes charity brunch that could make or break my next quarter. My hands were covered in flour, moving rhythmically against the marble countertop. I paused to wipe my forehead with the back of my wrist. That's when I glanced out the window above the sink. My breath hitched in my throat. The motion sensor light on the garage had flickered on, bathing the driveway in a harsh, clinical white glow. There was someone there. He looked like he was made of shadows and old regrets. A tall figure, hunched over against the biting wind, digging through my blue recycling bin. He wasn't throwing things around. He was methodical, silent. He picked up a soup can I had rinsed out the night before, inspected it, and set it down with a gentleness that broke my heart. He wasn't looking for money. He was looking for the remnants of a meal. I felt a pang in my chest that I couldn't ignore, a physical ache behind my sternum. I looked down at the tray of warm, herb-crusted biscuits I had just pulled from the oven. Steam curled off them, smelling of rosemary and sea salt. I couldn't stand there and do nothing. I couldn't just watch him starve while I was surrounded by excess. I grabbed a plastic container. I shoveled 4 biscuits inside. I added a ladle of heavy beef stew from the slow cooker that had been simmering overnight. I snapped the lid shut. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I unlocked the back door. The cold hit me like a physical slap. The air was sharp, tasting of snow and exhaust. My slippers crunched on the frosted grass. "Hey!" I called out, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. The figure froze. He didn't jump. He didn't scramble to run away like a startled animal. He went perfectly, terrifyingly still. It was a reaction that felt trained, not instinctual. Slowly he turned around. The harsh security light cut across his face. I gasped softly. He was older than I expected, maybe in his late 60s. His beard was a tangled mess of gray and white, matted and unkempt. But it was his eyes that stopped me in my tracks. They weren't glazed over with drugs or alcohol. They were steel gray, piercing, and shockingly alert. He looked at me, and for a second I felt like I was being assessed as a threat. I have food," I stammered, holding out the Tupperware container with both hands. The heat from the stew was warming my frozen palms. He stared at the container. His nostrils flared slightly. He could smell the beef. "It's fresh," I said, taking a cautious step forward. "Please, take it." He hesitated for a heartbeat longer. Then he moved. He didn't shuffle. He walked with a strange, stiff dignity, despite the oversized, tattered army jacket he wore. He stopped 2 feet away from me. Up close, he smelled of wet wool and ozone. He reached out a hand. His fingers were long, calloused, and covered in small silver scars. He took the container. Our fingers brushed. His skin was ice cold. He looked me in the eye, and the intensity of his gaze made my stomach flip. "Thank you," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together, like he hadn't used it in weeks. "I'm Kira," I whispered. He didn't offer a name in return. He just nodded, a sharp, singular motion of his chin. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the alleyway behind my house. I stood there shivering until my teeth chattered. I didn't know it then. I didn't know that the man in the alley was a ghost that the government had been trying to bury for decades. I didn't know that by handing him a bowl of stew, I had just signed my own warrant. I went back inside and locked the door, leaning my back against the wood. My heart was racing. I watched through the window, but he was gone. The next morning he was there again. And the morning after that. It became our ritual. I would cook. He would appear. I fed this lonely old man every day. I thought I was just doing a good deed. I had no idea I was feeding a national secret. The next morning the air was even colder, a brittle freeze that snapped at my exposed skin. I wasn't just clearing out leftovers this time. I had woken up an hour early specifically to bake. My kitchen smelled of yeast and caramelized onions, a sharp contrast to the gray, dead world outside. I ladled the beef stew into a heavy ceramic bowl this time, not plastic. It was rich, dark, and thick with root vegetables, the kind of meal that sticks to your ribs. I sliced a wedge of fresh, still warm sourdough bread, the crust crackling loudly under my knife. I walked out to the curb, the ceramic burning my fingertips through the kitchen towel I held it with. He was there. He was waiting by the recycling bin, exactly where he had been the day before. He looked smaller today, huddled inside that massive stained coat. I approached him slowly, trying to telegraph that I was safe. "Breakfast," I said softly, extending the bowl. He turned to me, and the hunger in his eyes was raw and terrifying. He reached out. That's when I saw the tremors. His hands shook so violently that I was afraid he would drop the bowl. It wasn't just a shiver from the cold. It was a neurological earthquake, a spasm of weakness and exhaustion. As his fingers clamped around the ceramic rim, the hot liquid splashed over the side. Brown gravy hit the sleeve of his tattered coat, soaking into the grime. He didn't even flinch at the heat. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The way he looked at the bread told me everything I needed to know. It was a look of pure, unadulterated worship. He looked at that sourdough like it was a lifeline thrown into a drowning sea. He turned away from me immediately, protecting the food with his body, hunched over like a gargoyle guarding a treasure. I stepped back, giving him his dignity. I retreated into the house, locking the door behind me with a soft click. But I didn't leave. I went straight to the living room window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. I watched him. He wasn't eating, he was inhaling. He tore the bread apart with savage efficiency, dipping it into the stew and shoving it into his mouth. He didn't chew. He swallowed whole chunks, his throat working convulsively. He finished every drop in seconds. He even ran his finger around the inside of the bowl to catch the last smear of gravy. Broke me. Tears pricked my eyes as I watched a man who moved like a soldier eat like a starving animal. I knew then that I couldn't stop. I was responsible for him now. The pattern shifted. I stopped waiting for the sunrise. By the fourth day, my internal clock had recalibrated entirely to late afternoon. 4 p.m. became the most important minute of my day. It wasn't just about charity anymore. It was a compulsion. I found myself prepping his meal before I even started on my client orders. I was roasting a chicken with lemon and thyme, basting it until the skin was a perfect, crispy gold. The scent filled my entire downstairs, warm and domestic. I carved the meat carefully. I wasn't throwing scraps into a bowl. I was plating a dinner. I added a mound of garlic mashed potatoes and a ladle of pan gravy. I walked to the front door, my heart doing that familiar anxious flutter in my chest. Opened the door. He was already there. He was sitting on the bottom step of my porch. He wasn't curled up against the cold. He wasn't sleeping. He was sitting with his back perfectly straight, his shoulders squared. He looked less like a homeless man and more like a sentry guarding a palace gate. He was scanning the street. His head moved slowly from left to right, his eyes tracking every passing car, every pedestrian walking a dog. He was on watch. I stepped onto the porch, the floorboards creaking under my weight. He didn't jump. He just stopped scanning and turned his head toward me. The tension in his shoulders dropped instantly. "You're early," I said, forcing a smile. He didn't smile back, but his eyes softened. "Hungry," he grunted. I handed him the plate. He took it with 2 hands, treating the china like it was made of glass. I sat down on the top step, keeping a respectful distance between us. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself against the afternoon chill. "The chicken is still hot," I said. "Be careful." He nodded. He began to eat. He was still fast, still ravenous, but the desperation was fading. He was eating with more precision now. He paused between bites to take a drink from the glass of water I had set down. As he reached for the glass, his sleeve rode up. The heavy wool of his army coat pulled back past his wrist. I saw it. On the inside of his left forearm, the skin was weathered and leathery. But there was ink there. It was faded, turned a hazy blue-green by time and sun exposure. I squinted. It wasn't a standard anchor or an eagle. It was a crest. A dagger wrapped in what looked like lightning bolts, sitting atop a globe. It looked aggressive. It looked official. It looked like the kind of mark you only get if you've done things people don't talk about at dinner parties. My stomach tightened. Who was this man? "That's quite a tattoo," I ventured, my voice quiet. He froze. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. He slowly lowered his arm. He used his other hand to tug the sleeve down, covering the ink aggressively. The air between us grew heavy. He stared at his food, refusing to look at me. I realized I had crossed a line. I had poked at a wound that hadn't healed. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't mean to pry. I noticed it." He chewed slowly. He swallowed. He looked out at the street, his gaze fixing on a black sedan driving past. He watched the car until it turned the corner. Only then did he look back at me. "Artie," he said, and blinked. "What?" "Name's Artie," he rasped. It was the most he had spoken to me in 4 days. The name didn't fit the face. Artie sounded like a friendly uncle, a baker, a man who fixed lawnmowers. This man looked like he had walked through hell and left a piece of his soul behind. "It's nice to meet you, Artie," I said softly. He grunted again, a non-committal sound deep in his throat. He finished the last of the potatoes. He set the plate down on the concrete. "Good chicken," he muttered. "I can make it again," I promised. "Tomorrow." He stood up. His knees popped audibly. He adjusted his coat, checking the buttons. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something other than hunger or fear. I saw concern. "Keep your door locked," he said. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that chilled my blood. "What?" I asked, standing up. He didn't explain. "Just lock it," he said. "Tight." He turned and walked down the driveway, falling back into that rhythmic, marching stride. I watched him go. I watched him disappear around the corner. I looked down at the empty plate on my porch. My hands were shaking. I picked up the china and went inside. I threw the deadbolt. I engaged the chain. I even checked the window latches. I told myself he was just a paranoid old man, his mind frayed by life on the streets. But I couldn't get the image of that tattoo out of my head. And I couldn't shake the feeling that when he looked at the street, he wasn't just watching traffic. He was watching for enemies. And now he was watching over me. I'm Clara Vance, 34, and up until last week, my biggest worry was meeting a deadline for a freelance logo design. The days following the tattoo incident were strange. An uneasy truce had formed between us. Artie still came every day at 4 p.m. I still cooked. But the silence between us was different now. It wasn't the silence of strangers. It was the heavy, loaded silence of two people ignoring a bomb sitting on the dinner table. I tried to convince myself I had imagined the intensity of that ink. I tried to tell myself that the lock your door warning was just the rambling of a senile mind. I wanted to believe he was just a confused old man. I really did. But the way he scanned the perimeter of my yard made it impossible to pretend. It was Tuesday afternoon. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with unshed rain. I had made meatloaf sandwiches. Thick slices of meat on toasted rye, slathered with ketchup and mayo. It was heavy comfort food for a heavy day. I wrapped 2 sandwiches in foil, the heat radiating against my palms. I walked to the front door. I peered through the peephole first. It had become a habit I couldn't break. Artie was there. He was sitting on the porch steps, whittling a piece of driftwood with a small, rusty pocketknife. His movements were slow. His shoulders were hunched forward in that permanent curve of defeat. He looked harmless. He looked like part of the scenery. I unlocked the door and stepped out. "Meatloaf today, Artie," I announced, trying to keep my voice light. He stopped whittling. He folded the knife away with a quick, practiced flick of his wrist. He looked up at me, his eyes cloudy and distant. "Thank you, ma'am," he mumbled. He reached for the foil-wrapped package. That's when the sound started. It wasn't a noise at first. It was a vibration. I felt it in the soles of my feet. The loose pane in my living room window rattled in its frame. Then came the thumping. Thwop 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 thwop. It was a rhythmic, chopping beat that grew louder with every second. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a traffic chopper. It was a deep, guttural roar that resonated in my chest cavity. I looked up, shielding my eyes against the gray sky. "Is that a medical flight?" I asked aloud, mostly to myself. Artie didn't answer. The noise became deafening. A shadow swept over the lawn, moving fast. A helicopter crested the tree line. It was black. Matte black, with no news station logos, no medical crosses, no registration numbers that I could see. It was flying dangerously low. The wind from the rotors whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. My wind chimes thrashed violently against the porch column. I instinctively took a step back toward the door, my heart hammering in my throat. I looked down at Artie. I expected to see him cowering. I expected to see him covering his ears, overwhelmed by the sensory overload. I expected the old man. But the old man was gone. In a fraction of a second, Artie had transformed. He didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He dropped into a tactical crouch. It was a movement of terrifying fluidity. One knee hit the concrete, his body angling sideways to minimize his silhouette. His right hand flew to his waist, hovering over a phantom holster that wasn't there. It was muscle memory. It was reflex. His head snapped up. The milky haze that usually clouded his eyes had vanished completely. His gaze was no longer vacant. It was sharp as flint. It was predatory. He wasn't looking at the helicopter with wonder or fear. He was tracking it. His eyes moved in perfect sync with the aircraft's trajectory, calculating speed, calculating distance. He was analyzing a threat. The helicopter banked hard to the left, circling back over the neighborhood. Artie shifted his weight, pivoting on the ball of his foot. He didn't look like a man whose joints ached from the cold. He looked like a coiled spring. He looked lethal. For 10 seconds, the world was nothing but the roar of the engine and the wind tearing at our clothes. Then the pilot corrected course. The black machine dipped its nose and accelerated away, disappearing over the roof of the neighbor's house. The sound began to fade, returning to a rhythmic thrum in the distance. Silence rushed back into the void. My heart was beating so hard I felt dizzy. I stared at Artie. He stayed in that crouch for a full 5 seconds after the bird was gone. He was still scanning the horizon, his jaw set in a hard line. Then, slowly, the tension left his frame. He blinked. He slumped. The sharp, dangerous soldier melted away, and the hunched old man returned. He picked up the foil-wrapped sandwich from where he had dropped it. He brushed a speck of dust off the aluminum. He stood up slowly, groaning as his knees straightened. He refused to look at me. My mouth was dry. "Artie," I whispered. He didn't acknowledge me. "That wasn't normal," I said, my voice trembling. The way you moved." He turned his back to me. He started walking down the driveway, clutching the sandwich to his chest. "Artie, wait," called out. He stopped. He didn't turn around. "Who are you looking for?" he asked. "Or, who is looking for you?" His shoulders stiffened. He stood there for a long moment, a statue in a dirty coat. Then he spoke, his voice a low gravel that barely carried over the wind. "They're circling," he said. "Who?" I demanded. "The sweepers," he said. He started walking again, faster this time. "Go inside, Clara," he threw back over his shoulder. He used my name. I hadn't told him my name. I froze on the porch, my hand gripping the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. I watched him disappear around the corner of the street. My mind was reeling. Tactical crouch. The scanning. The way he tracked the bird. And now my name. I realized then that Artie was no ordinary drifter. He wasn't just a victim of a hard life. He was a weapon. A weapon that had been discarded or lost or hidden. And I was the one feeding him. I looked up at the sky where the black helicopter had vanished. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't just doing a good deed anymore. I was harboring a target. I went inside and locked the door. Then I locked the deadbolt. Then I slid the chain into place. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a chair. I wedged it under the doorknob. Felt ridiculous. Felt paranoid. But as I stood there in my dark hallway, listening to the silence of my empty house, I knew one thing for certain. The war Artie was fighting wasn't over. And now it was on my doorstep. I'm Clara Vance, 34. And until this week, my definition of high stakes was trying to keep a souffle from collapsing. Now my life feels like a movie I never auditioned for. 2 days had passed since the black helicopter shook the shingles off my roof. 2 days since Artie, the homeless man I'd been feeding for months, dropped into a combat stance that made my blood run cold. 2 days since he called me by my name. I hadn't slept. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. Every passing car sounded like an invasion. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. I told myself the helicopter was a coincidence and Artie was just observant. Then the SUV arrived. It was Wednesday late afternoon. I was in the kitchen prepping a beef stew. I was chopping carrots, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the knife usually calming my nerves. I glanced out the window above the sink. My hands stopped moving. A vehicle was parked at the very edge of my driveway, right where the pavement met the street. It wasn't a neighbor's car. It wasn't a delivery van. It was a massive black Chevrolet Suburban. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like oil slicks. There were no dealership stickers. There was no front license plate. It was just sitting there idling. I could see the faint puff of exhaust from the tailpipe, dissolving into the gray air. Put the knife down. I wiped my hands on my apron, my palms suddenly slick with sweat. I took a step closer to the window, peering through the blinds. I couldn't see inside, but I could feel them. Felt eyes on me. It was a physical sensation, like a prickle of heat spreading across the back of my neck. They were watching the house. They were watching me. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. Checked the clock. 3:55 p.m. Artie would be here in 5 minutes. Panic flared in my chest. If those people in the car were looking for him, he was walking right into a trap. I thought about running out the back door to intercept him. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? Asterisk. There's a car parked legally on the street and a homeless man is coming for dinner? Asterisk. Felt paralyzed. I went back to the stew, moving on autopilot. I ladled the thick, brown gravy into a disposable bowl. My hands were shaking so bad I spilled a drop on the counter. I grabbed a spoon. I grabbed a napkin. I walked to the front door, my legs feeling like lead. Opened it. The cold air hit my face, but it didn't cool the heat of my fear. Artie was there. He was walking up the driveway, his head down, his gait that familiar, shuffling limp. But as he got closer to the porch, I saw the change. He wasn't looking at the ground. His eyes were darting sideways, flicking toward the black SUV idling 20 feet away. He didn't turn his head. He didn't break stride. But his entire body had gone rigid. The slumped shoulders were gone. The limp was less pronounced. He reached the steps and I held out the bowl. "Artie," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "That car." He took the bowl. He didn't look at the food. He looked straight at me. His eyes were clear, sharp, and terrifyingly alert. "I know," he said. His voice wasn't the raspy mumble of a beggar. It was the low, clipped tone of a commander. "Do they want you?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. He ignored the question. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space for the first time. He smelled of old rain and wood smoke, but underneath that, I smelled adrenaline. "Listen to me, Clara," he said. He used my name again. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Go inside," he ordered. "Right now. But do not look at the car," he hissed. "Do not let them see you looking." He shifted his weight, angling his body to block me from the street view. It was a protective maneuver. He was using himself as a human shield. "Lock the deadbolt," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "Do you have a slide chain?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Use it," he said. "Stay away from the windows tonight." "Artie, come inside," I pleaded. "Please. If they're waiting for you." He shook his head. A grim smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "They aren't waiting for me," he said softly. "They're confirming the asset." "What does that mean?" I demanded. "It means they're deciding if I'm worth the mess," he said. The engine of the SUV revved. It was a deep, aggressive growl. Artie didn't flinch. He turned his back to me, facing the street. He held the bowl of stew in one hand, but his other hand hung loose at his side, fingers twitching. "Go," he commanded without turning around. I stepped back, closed the door. I threw the deadbolt with a loud clack. I slid the chain into place. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. I expected shouting. I expected gunshots. I expected tires screeching. But there was only silence. I waited for 5 minutes. And finally I couldn't take it anymore. I crawled across my living room floor, staying below the window line. I reached up and parted the blinds just a fraction of an inch. The driveway was empty. Artie was gone. But the black SUV was still there. It hadn't moved. The exhaust was still puffing into the cold air. They hadn't taken him. They were just waiting. And then as I watched, the rear window rolled down about 2 inches. It was too dark to see a face. But I saw the glint of a lens. They weren't just watching anymore. They were filming. I pulled my hand back as if the blinds were red hot. I scrambled away from the window and sat with my back against the wall, hugging my knees to my chest. I was alone in my house. But I had never felt less safe. Artie was right. They were deciding if he was worth the mess. And I had a terrible sinking feeling that the mess included me. I'm Clara Vance, 34. And I have never received so much as a speeding ticket in my entire life. Now, I am harboring a fugitive in my backyard. It was midnight, the witching hour. My house felt less like a home and more like a cage. I had been sitting in the hallway for hours. My back was pressed against the wall. My knees were pulled up to my chest. I had a heavy cast-iron skillet resting on the floor beside me. It was a pathetic weapon against a black ops team. But it was all I had. The black SUV had finally driven away around 10 p.m. I watched its taillights fade into the darkness. But I knew they weren't really gone. They were just repositioning. They were giving me a false sense of security. I tried to close my eyes. I tried to breathe. Then I heard it. Came from the backyard. It was a metallic clank. It sounded like a shovel falling over. My eyes snapped open. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. I held my breath. I listened. Silence. Then a low, wet cough. It was muffled. It was suppressed. But it was human. I grabbed the skillet. I stood up, my legs trembling violently. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stay inside. Call the police, my brain shrieked. But I couldn't. If that was Artie out there, the police wouldn't help him. They would hand him over to the men in the SUV. I moved to the back door. I unlocked it with shaking fingers. I didn't turn on the porch light. That would make me a target. I slipped out into the cold night air. The grass was wet with dew. It soaked through my socks instantly. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. My backyard was a sea of shadows. I scanned the garden. The tomato plants looked like skeletal fingers. The bushes looked like crouching men. I tightened my grip on the skillet handle. "Artie," I whispered. The wind snatched my voice away. I heard the sound again. A scuff of a boot on concrete. It was coming from the tool shed. The shed was a rotting wooden structure at the very back of the property. I hated going in there during the day. At night, it looked like the mouth of a monster. I crept toward it. My feet made squishing sounds in the mud. I reached the door. It was slightly ajar. The padlock was hanging open, the hasp twisted. Someone had forced it. I took a deep breath. I pushed the door open with the toe of my shoe. Creak. A long, high-pitched whine that shattered the silence. I raised the skillet. "Who's there?" I hissed. A hand shot out of the darkness. Grabbed my wrist. I gasped, dropping the skillet. It landed with a deafening clang. The grip on my wrist tightened. It was incredibly strong. It pulled me forward into the musty darkness of the shed. I stumbled. I fell to my knees on the dirty wooden floor. I smelled gasoline. I smelled fertilizer. And I smelled blood. "Quiet," a voice rasped. 'Twas Artie. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. He was huddled in the corner, wedged between the lawnmower and a stack of old terracotta pots. He looked terrible. His face was a mask of sweat and grime. His lips were pale. There was a dark, wet stain spreading across the shoulder of his dirty coat. "Artie," I breathed. "You're hurt." "Asset denial," he muttered. "Got grazed." He wasn't making sense. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said, reaching for him. He recoiled. "No hospital," he snarled. "That's the first place they look." His breathing was ragged. Sounded like a broken bellows. Every inhale was a struggle. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "You shouldn't have come out here, Clara. I heard you. You have terrible noise discipline," he said. "You walk like an elephant." Even bleeding out, he was criticizing my stealth. "Why are you here?" I asked. "The SUV." "They were watching. They lost the visual," he said. I doubled back. Needed a extraction point. He coughed again. He winced, clutching his shoulder. Then he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small object. He grabbed my hand again. His skin was burning hot. He slapped the object into my palm and curled my fingers over it. "Take it," he ordered. I looked down. It was a USB drive. It was heavy. It wasn't plastic. It was brushed steel, cold and sleek. There were no markings on it. "What is this?" I asked. "Insurance," he whispered. He leaned his head back against the wall of the shed. He looked exhausted. "If they breach the perimeter," he said. "If they take me." He paused to breathe. "You upload that." "Upload it where?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "Everywhere," he said. "News sites. Forums. Send it to the New York Times. Send it to the BBC." He squeezed my hand. "Do not let them bury it, Clara." "What's on it?" I whispered. He looked at me. His eyes were sad. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much evil. "Names," he said. "Locations. The program." "What program?" "The one that made me," he said. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold night air. "Artie, you're scaring me." "Good," he said. "Fear keeps you sharp." He pushed my hand away. "Hide it," he commanded. "Not in the house. Bury it. Tape it under a gutter. Somewhere outside." "I'm not leaving you here," I said. "You have to." "No," I said firmly. I surprised myself. I sounded like him. "You're bleeding in my shed," I said. "I'm not leaving you to die next to a lawnmower." He looked at me, assessing. He was calculating the risk. He was weighing his survival against my safety. "They will kill you, Clara," he said softly. "If they find you with me, you are collateral damage." "They already know who I am," I said. "They were filming me." Artie's face hardened. "They filmed you." He nodded. "Then the timeline has accelerated," he said. He tried to stand up. He groaned. His legs buckled. Caught him. He was heavy. He was dead weight. But beneath the coat, beneath the frailty, I felt the muscle. I felt the weapon. "Lean on me," I said. "Clara." "Shut up, Artie," I said. "We're going inside." He didn't argue. He draped his good arm over my shoulder. We stumbled out of the shed. We moved across the dark yard like a three-legged animal. My heart was pounding in my ears. I expected a spotlight to hit us at any second. I expected a bullet. But the night remained silent. We reached the back door. I shoved him inside. I locked the door. I threw the deadbolt. I collapsed against the wood, sliding down to the floor. Artie slumped against the kitchen cabinets. He was clutching his shoulder. Blood was dripping onto my clean linoleum. I looked at the silver drive still clutched in my hand. I had just invited the war into my kitchen. And I had the detonator in my palm. I'm Clara Vance, 34, and until tonight, the most illegal thing I had ever done was jaywalk across Main Street on a Sunday morning. Now, I am an accomplice to high treason. The kitchen smelled of copper and fear. Artie was slumped against my cabinets. His blood was dark against the white laminate. He was breathing hard, his hand clamped over his shoulder. I looked at the silver drive in my hand. Felt heavy. Felt like it was radioactive. "Hide it," Artie wheezed. He tried to push himself up, his boots sliding on the linoleum. "Now, Clara. Before they breach." Panic made my vision tunnel. I looked around my kitchen. Where do you hide a piece of metal that can bring down a government program? Under the sink. Too obvious. In the freezer. That's where they look in the movies. My eyes landed on the pantry door. I ran to it and ripped it open. My hands were shaking so badly I knocked over a box of cereal. It spilled across the floor with a sound like dry rain. I ignored it. I grabbed the loaf of French bread I had bought yesterday. It was starting to go stale. It was hard as a rock. Perfect. I used a serrated knife to saw off the end. Crumbs flew everywhere. I used the handle of a wooden spoon to smash the soft white insides, creating a tunnel. I shoved the cold steel drive into the bread. I pushed it deep past the crust into the center of the loaf. I stuck the end piece back on. I placed the baguette back in the paper bag. I rolled the top down. I shoved it behind a stack of canned pumpkin I'd had since Thanksgiving. I turned back to Artie. He was watching me with a look that might have been impressed, or might have been pained. "Good," he grunted. He was standing now. He was swaying, but he was standing. "Now I go," he said. "What?" I asked, grabbing a roll of paper towels. "No. You're bleeding. Sit down." "I can't stay here," he said. His voice was firm. It was the voice of a man giving an order. "If they come in here and find me, they burn the house down," he said. "With you in it." "I don't care," I lied. I did care. I was terrified. "I care," he said softly. He took the paper towels from me. He pressed a wad of them against his shoulder. He winced, his jaw tight. "I go back to the shed," he said. "I draw their fire. I keep the engagement zone away from the structure." "You'll die out there," I whispered. "I'm harder to kill than I look," he said. He moved to the back door. He paused. He looked at me. For a second, the soldier vanished. I just saw a tired old man who liked my pot roast. "Stay away from the windows," he said. "If you hear shooting, you get in the bathtub and you stay there. Artie, lock this door behind me." He slipped out into the night. I locked the door. I threw the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I did neither. I turned off the kitchen lights. The house plunged into darkness. The silence returned. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy. It was thick. The air in the house felt pressurized, like the atmosphere before a massive lightning strike. I could feel the electricity on my skin. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. Every rustle of the wind sounded like a whisper. I couldn't stay in the kitchen. I crept into the living room. I crawled on my hands and knees to the back window. I needed to see him. I needed to know he was still there. I reached up and parted the curtains just a fraction. My backyard was a black void. But I knew where to look. I stared at the shed. It was a darker shape against the dark trees. I saw a tiny movement inside. A shadow within a shadow. He was there. He was sitting in the dark, amongst the rakes and the fertilizer. He was waiting for an enemy I couldn't see. He was waiting to die to protect me. I sat with my back against the wall, hugging my knees. I stared at the pantry door across the open-plan living area. A baguette. A drive. Asterisk names. Locations. The program. Asterisk. What had I gotten myself into? I thought about the men in the SUV. I thought about the camera lens. I thought about the way Artie had looked at me. Asset denial. He was an asset. And they were here to liquidate him. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. My phone was in my pocket. Felt heavy too. I wanted to call my mom. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to call anyone. But Artie had said no. The first place they look. Suddenly, the motion sensor light on the neighbor's garage flickered. It didn't turn on fully. Just buzzed. Flash of weak yellow light. Then darkness again. I held my breath. I pressed my face closer to the glass. I saw it. Movement. Not by the shed. By the fence line. Three shapes. They were low to the ground. They moved like liquid. They flowed over the wooden fence without making a sound. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They were wearing black. They had night vision goggles. They had rifles. They were sweeping across my lawn. They were heading straight for the shed. My heart stopped. They had found him. I looked at the shed window. It was dark. Did Artie see them? Did he know? One of the figures raised a hand. The other two stopped instantly. They were 20 feet from the shed door. They were setting up a breach. I had to do something. Couldn't just watch him die. I looked around the room wildly. My eyes landed on the car keys sitting on the entry table. My car was in the driveway. The alarm fob. If I set off the car alarm, it would make noise. It would be a distraction. It might give Artie a second, or it might get me killed. My hand shook as I reached for the keys. I gripped the fob. My thumb hovered over the red panic button. I looked back out the window. The figures were moving again. They were stacking up on the shed door. I squeezed my eyes shut. I thought of the lonely old man who ate my leftovers. I thought of the blood on my kitchen floor. Pressed the button. I'm Clara Vance, 34, and I just tried to outsmart a Black Ops kill team with a Toyota key fob. My thumb mashed the red button. The night tore open. My car alarm screamed into the silence. Asterisk honk. Honk. Honk, asterisk. The headlights flashed in a rhythmic, blinding strobe. It was the most obnoxious sound in the world. Right now it was a symphony. I watched through the crack in the curtains. The three shadows moving toward the shed froze. They weren't expecting a 2018 sedan to join the fight. They turned toward the driveway. Their night vision goggles must have flared out from the strobing lights. Distraction achieved. Then I saw the muzzle flash. It came from the shed. It was small, sharp, and precise. Pop-pop. Artie. He wasn't hiding. He was hunting. One of the shadows near the fence crumpled. He went down like a sack of cement. The other two dove into the tall grass. The backyard erupted. I saw suppressors flashing like fireflies in the dark. Asterisk thwip. Whip. Thwip, asterisk. Bullets chewed up the side of my garage. My car windshield shattered. The alarm died instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was heavy. It was suffocating. I scrambled back from the window. I crawled on my hands and knees across the living room rug. My breath was coming in short, jagged gasps. I needed to hide. Artie said the bathtub. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly. Collapsed behind the sofa. Check my phone. 2:58 a.m. I stared at the screen until the numbers clicked over. 2:59 a.m. I could hear shouting outside now. Muffled voices. Tactical commands. They weren't whispering anymore. They knew the element of surprise was gone. Curled into a ball. I squeezed my eyes shut. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to since Sunday school. Asterisk, please let Artie be gone. Please let him be far away. Asterisk. 3 a.m. The world ended. Started with the window. The big bay window facing the street didn't just break. It imploded. Something heavy and metallic smashed through the glass and rolled across my hardwood floor. I heard the hiss. I opened my eyes for a fraction of a second. Canister. Flash out, a voice screamed. I didn't have time to cover my ears. Bang. White light. Pure absolute white. It seared through my eyelids. Felt like someone had driven a spike into my brain. The sound was physical. It punched the air out of my lungs. I couldn't hear. I couldn't see. I was floating in a sea of high-pitched ringing. Hee. Then the vibrations started. I felt the front door die. I didn't hear the kick, but I felt the impact shake the floorboards under my cheek. Wood splintered. Hinges screamed. The door was kicked off its frame with such violence it slammed into the opposite wall. The air in the room changed instantly. It went from the stale smell of fear to the sharp, biting scent of cordite and aggressive men. Go! Oh! Go! The voices were distorted, like they were underwater. Boots thundered on my floor. Heavy military boots. I tried to push myself up. I tried to scream, "Don't shoot!" But my voice was just a croak. A beam of red light cut through the smoke in my living room. Danced across the wall. It landed on my chest. Contact left. I saw a shape loom over me. Giant. He was covered in black armor from head to toe. He looked like a monster. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask me to put my hands up. He kicked my legs out from under me. I hit the floor hard. The wind left me again. A heavy boot slammed into the center of my back. Pinned me to the rug like an insect. "Secure," he roared. I turned my head to the side, gasping for air, tasting dust and carpet fibers. My vision was swimming. Through the haze I saw more of them. Men. Maybe 5. They moved like machines. They were sweeping their rifles left and right. They were tearing my house apart. Cushions were ripped off the sofa. Drawers were pulled out and dumped. The man standing on me leaned down. He grabbed a handful of my hair. He yanked my head back. I screamed then. I couldn't help it. He brought his face close to mine. He was wearing a balaclava, but I could see his eyes. They were cold. They were blue. They were the eyes of a man who killed for a living. On his shoulder a patch caught the light. It wasn't a police badge. It wasn't a sheriff's star. It was a subdued olive drab patch. It just said military. "Where is the asset?" he screamed. His voice was raw. "I don't know. Sup. Don't lie to me, Clara." He knew my name. The terror turned into ice in my veins. "He was in the shed," cried. "He was in the shed." "The shed is empty," the man roared. "We have 2 casualties outside. Where is Arthur Penhaligon?" Arthur. Artie. They didn't find him. A tiny spark of hope flared in my chest. He had escaped. "I don't know," I said again. The man shoved my face back into the rug. "Clear the rooms," he barked to the others. "Tear the walls down if you have to. Find the drive." My heart stopped. A drive. I looked sideways across the floor. From this angle I could see into the kitchen. I could see the pantry door. It was slightly ajar. I could see the bag of groceries on the shelf, the stack of canned pumpkin, and the stale baguette poking out of the paper bag. The drive was inside the bread. It was 20 feet away. "Search the kitchen," the leader commanded. One of the soldiers turned toward the kitchen. He walked right past me. He walked right toward the pantry. I squeezed my eyes shut. I waited for the sound of crinkling paper. I waited for the end of my life. I'm Clara Vance, 34, and I am currently watching a government hit squad dismantle my life one drywall sheet at a time. The soldier turned toward the pantry. My lungs seized. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to look away, but I couldn't. I watched his gloved hand reach for the shelf. He swept his arm violently to the left. The cans of pumpkin puree went flying. They hit the tile floor with a heavy, wet thud. The box of pasta exploded, and the paper bag containing the baguette, and the encrypted drive that people were dying for, toppled off the shelf. It hit the floor, slid across the linoleum. It came to a rest against the base of the refrigerator. It looked like garbage. It looked like nothing. The soldier kicked it aside as he stepped into the pantry to check the corners. He didn't bend down. He didn't check the bread. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Clear!" the soldier shouted. "Living room clear," another voice echoed. The heavy boot was removed from my back. I gasped, sucking in air that tasted like drywall dust and terror. I tried to push myself up, but my arms were shaking too hard to support my weight. I slumped against the side of the sofa. My living room was a war zone. The bay window was gone. My front door was a splintered wreck in the hallway. And then the chaos shifted. The frantic energy of the tactical team vanished. They stepped back, hugging the walls, their rifles still raised but no longer sweeping. They were making room. A man walked through the ruined frame of my front door. He wasn't wearing armor. He wasn't holding a gun. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my car. His shoes were polished Italian leather, and they crunched softly over the broken glass on my hardwood floor. He looked out of place. He looked terrifying. He walked straight toward me. He didn't look at the soldiers. He didn't look at the destruction. He only looked at me. He stopped 2 feet away and crouched down. He balanced on the balls of his feet, perfectly calm. He smelled like sandalwood and cold mint. "Clara," he said. His voice was smooth. It was a voice used to giving orders in quiet rooms. "I'm sorry about the mess," he said, gesturing vaguely at my ruined home. "But you have been difficult to reach." I stared at him, my chest heaving. "Who are you?" I whispered. He ignored the question. He reached into his jacket pocket. I flinched, expecting a weapon. He pulled out a photograph. He held it up to my face. "Do you know this man?" he asked. I looked at the glossy print. 'Twas Artie. But it wasn't the Artie I knew. The man in the photo wasn't wearing a stained cardigan and muddy gardening boots. He was wearing a dress uniform. His chest was heavy with medals. There were stars on his collar. His face was shaved, his jaw set like granite. He looked powerful. He looked dangerous. "This is General Arthur Penhaligon," the man in the suit said softly. "Former head of Strategic Defense Logistics." My mouth fell open. He's a plumber," I stammered. "He fixes sinks." The man in the suit smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "He fixes problems, Clara. And right now, he has created a very large one for the United States government." He tapped the photo. 3 years ago, the general disappeared. He took a hard drive with him. That drive contains the names of operatives who do not officially exist. It contains the locations of black sites that are not on any map. He leaned closer. He is a traitor, Clara. No, I said. The denial came out before I could stop it. I thought of Artie fixing my fence. I thought of him eating my lasagna with shaky hands. I thought of the way he looked at the birds in the feeder. He's a good man, I said. The suit's expression hardened. He is a thief. And by harboring him, you are an accessory to treason. He grabbed my chin. His fingers were cold and strong. Where is the drive? My eyes darted to the kitchen, to the fridge, to the crumpled paper bag on the floor. I forced my gaze back to him. I don't know, I cried. He just came for dinner. I felt sorry for him. Don't lie to me. I'm not lying. Please just leave me alone. Sir! A voice shouted from the backyard. The man in the suit didn't let go of my face. Report, he called out. His eyes locked on mine. We found a false floor in the shed, the voice crackled over the radio. Thermal signature positive. He's down there. My heart shattered. He hadn't escaped. He had buried himself. He was waiting. Flush him out, the suit ordered. Use the gas. No, I screamed. Don't hurt him. I tried to scramble away, but the suit shoved me back down. We heard the thump of a canister launching outside. Then coughing. Deep, hacking coughs that sounded like wet gravel. Then the sound of a struggle. The dull thud of a rifle but hitting flesh. I covered my mouth with my hands. 2 soldiers appeared in the doorway leading to the backyard. They were dragging something between them. 'Twas Artie. He was limp. His feet dragged on the floor. His face was covered in blood. One eye was swollen shut. His cardigan was torn open, revealing a Kevlar vest I hadn't known he was wearing. They threw him onto the living room floor like a sack of garbage. He landed hard near the coffee table. He groaned. Artie! I screamed. I lunged toward him. The man in the suit grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. Pain shot through my shoulder. Stay down, he hissed. Artie coughed, spitting blood onto my rug. He pushed himself up on one arm. His remaining good eye found me. There was no fear in it, only sadness. I'm sorry, Clara, he rasped. The suit walked over to Artie. He stood over him, looking down with pure contempt. General, the suit said. You look terrible. Artie let out a wheezing laugh. Better than you look in that cheap suit, Vance. Vance. My last name is Vance. Why did Artie call him Vance? The man in the suit stiffened. He lashed out with his foot. He kicked Artie in the ribs. I heard the crack of bone. Artie cried out and collapsed flat on the floor. Stop it! I shrieked. You're killing him. The suit turned back to me. He straightened his tie. He has the drive, Clara. Or you do. He pulled a pistol from inside his jacket. He didn't point it at Artie. He pointed it at my head. Tell me where it is, Arthur, the suit said calmly. Or the girl dies first. Artie's eye went wide. He looked at the gun. Then he looked at me. Then he looked past me. His gaze flickered to the kitchen, to the fridge, to the bread. He knew. And now I had to make a choice. I'm Clara Vance, 34. And the man holding a gun to my forehead isn't just a government agent. He is my estranged brother, Marcus. The realization hit me harder than the soldier's boot had. I looked up into eyes that mirrored my own. They were cold. They were empty. Marcus. I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. What are you doing? He didn't flinch. He didn't look at me with recognition or pity. He kept the barrel pressed tight against my skin, the metal burning like dry ice. "I asked you a question, General," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Where is the drive? Or do I paint this living room with my sister's brains?" Artie stared at us from the floor. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the terror behind his stoic mask. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid for me. His eyes darted to the kitchen again, to the baguette lying against the fridge. If he told them, they would find it. They would kill him because he was a loose end. And they would kill me because I had seen too much. But if he didn't tell them, Marcus would pull the trigger. "Don't," Artie rasped. "3," Marcus counted. "It's in the kitchen." I wanted to scream. "It's in the bread. Just take it." But my throat had closed up. Fear had paralyzed my vocal cords. "2," Marcus said. His finger tightened on the trigger. I squeezed my eyes shut. I thought about the lasagna. I thought about the way Artie hummed when he watered my hydrangeas. "It's not here." Artie screamed. The sound tore through the room. My eyes snapped open. Artie was pushing himself up. His face twisted in a snarl. "It's not here, Vance. I moved it." Marcus didn't lower the gun. "Where?" "The drop point," Artie wheezed. "Route 9. The old gas station. I buried it behind the pumps." Marcus stared at him. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing. "You're lying," Marcus said. "Am I?" Artie challenged. "Kill her and you lose the leverage. Kill me and you lose the location. That drive is encrypted with a chaotic algorithm, Marcus. You can't crack it without the key. And the key is in my head." Artie tapped his bleeding temple. "You need me alive." Marcus hesitated. For the first time, the calm facade cracked. He looked at Artie, then down at me. He weighed the options, calculated the risks. Slowly, agonizingly, he pulled the gun away from my forehead. I slumped forward, gasping for air, my forehead throbbing where the metal had dug in. "Get him up," Marcus ordered the soldiers. The two men hoisted Artie to his feet. He groaned, his legs buckling, but they held him up. As they dragged him toward the door, Artie turned his head. He looked at me one last time. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say sorry. He just looked at the kitchen. He looked at the pantry door. And he winked. A single, swollen, bloody wink. "Move!" Marcus barked. He stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. "You were never here, Clara," he said, his voice devoid of any familial warmth. "If you speak about this, to the police, to the press, to anyone, I will finish what I started today. Do you understand?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. He turned and walked out into the night. I heard the heavy doors of the SUVs slam shut. I heard the engines roar to life. I heard the gravel crunching as the convoy sped away. And then silence. A heavy, ringing silence that felt louder than the screaming. I lay on the floor for a long time. I listened to the wind blowing through the shattered bay window. I smelled the lingering scent of sandalwood and copper. Eventually, the survival instinct kicked in. Forced myself up. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. I stumbled into the kitchen. My legs were shaking so hard I had to hold on to the counter. I walked over to the refrigerator. I looked down. The paper bag was crumpled and torn. The baguette had slid halfway out. I reached down with trembling hands and picked up the bread. Felt heavy. Too heavy. I tore the crust open. Embedded deep in the dough, wrapped in plastic wrap, was a small silver USB drive. I held it to my chest and sank to the floor, sobbing until my throat was raw. I didn't stay in the house that night. I drove 3 towns over to a motel that took cash. I didn't sleep. The next morning I went to a bank I had never used before. I rented a safety deposit box. I put the drive inside. And then I waited. I didn't go to the police. Marcus was the police. I didn't go to the news. Not yet. I waited until I knew I was safe. Until I had moved to a small apartment in the city, under a sublet lease that didn't have my name on it. Took 3 months to find the right contact. An investigative journalist known for breaking stories that made politicians resign. I sent him a copy of the files. I didn't include a return address. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in a coffee shop, watching the TV mounted in the corner. Breaking news, the banner read in bold red letters. Shadow Logistics. Anonymous leak exposes Black Ops budget theft and illegal surveillance. The anchor was talking about treason, about billions of dollars missing, about a general named Arthur Penhaligon who had been framed to cover up the crimes of a shadow directorate. The screen flashed a photo of Artie. It was the same photo Marcus had shown me. The general in his uniform. General Penhaligon's whereabouts remain unknown, the anchor said. Sources say he disappeared while gathering evidence for this report. I sipped my coffee. It tasted bitter. The world was on fire. Senators were being indicted. Generals were being arrested. Even Marcus Vance was named in the scrolling ticker at the bottom of the screen as a person of interest. Justice was happening. The truth was out. But my house is still a ruin. And my friend is still gone. I moved back to the cottage 6 months later. Fixed the window. I replaced the door. I replanted the hydrangeas that the soldiers had trampled. But the silence is different now. It's not peaceful. It's hollow. Every day at 4 p.m. I make a pot of tea. I put a plate of cookies on the small table on the porch. I sit in the rocking chair and I watch the driveway. I watch the birds landing on the feeder he fixed. I watch the wind rustle the trees where he used to hide. I know the odds. I know how these stories usually end. But I also know Artie. I know he's stubborn. I know he's resourceful. And I know he never got to finish his lasagna. So I sit. And I wait. And I keep the porch light on. Just in case.